Welcome to the day-night cycle tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to set up a pretty simple but effective day-night cycle in your game. So this is kind of what it will look like. Have it moving pretty fast right now, but it starts at midnight. The sun goes up in the sky, and then it goes back down, and goes back to midnight, and so on. So it just keeps going around, pretty much like you expect, getting darker at night and lighter during the day. So yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and I'll hop right into it. So launch the Epic Game Launcher and go ahead and launch Unreal. I'm currently on 4.23.1, so I'll launch that one. And wait for it to launch. All right, so we're going to create a new project, and I'm going to call it, so select Blueprint, and it doesn't really matter which project you select. I'm just going to use the third person, and I'm going to call it day night, but of course call it whatever you like, and then create the project, and just wait for it to create real quick. All right, and I'm going to move this one over here just so I can reference it. All right, so real quick before we jump into it, I just kind of want to explain a couple concepts of how this is going to work. So there's two things we need to cover real quick. So you can see in the scene there is this directional light, and there's also this sun and like the skybox and the clouds and all that around it. So these are two separate objects. So the directional light, this thing, this represents the light for the sun itself, but it's not the same thing as the sun. So if you rotate this to face this way, you'll see the light is now coming down from the top right, but the sun is still in the same position. And again, that's because these are not the same object. But they are, however, linked to each other. So if you click on the sky, it will select the sky sphere over here. And you can see down here in the default section, there's a directional light actor, and it's set to our light source, which is this guy. So they are linked to each other, and since they're linked, if you change the light direction and then hit this little refresh material button, it will update the skybox to match wherever you rotate this light to. So if I say the light is below us pointing up, and then I click on the skybox and I hit refresh, then it will set it to a nice, nighttime scene. So with that information in mind, we can kind of go ahead and start writing the code to make this happen automatically. So there's really two things we need to do. One is we need to, keep track of the current time of day and update it. And the other thing we need to do is rotate the sun and the directional light to match the time of day correctly. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to edit this sky sphere. But if you click on the blueprint over here and you click on this little browse button, you'll notice it's actually in the engine content directory. And we don't really want to edit things that are in the engine content directory. We just want to copy them and then edit a copy of them. So go ahead and drag this into your content folder and say copy here. By the way, you show this little thing on the left with this little button right here, if you didn't know that. So now go back to the content directory. So here's the copy that we just made, and I'm just going to name this to BP my sky sphere, just so we know which one's which. So we want to replace the sky with the one that we just created. So click on the sky and hit delete. Or click on it over here maybe. Okay, yep, hit delete. And then drag it into the scene, your new one. So again, the sky sphere needs to be linked to the directional light, and right now it's not. So make sure you come over here and you link it to this light. And there you go. We're back to seeing the night scene, and it's back to being linked to our directional light, which is good. So now that we have our own sky sphere set up, we can actually edit it safely. So go ahead and open it up. And inside of here, we want to create a function to allow, developers or yourself to easily set the time of day on the sky sphere, and then have the sky sphere figure out exactly where the sun needs to be. So on the left here, we're going to create a function, and we're just going to say it's called set time of day, and it's going to take in a float for the time of day. and this is going to be in seconds, so I'm just going to put seconds in parentheses after that, just so it's super clear. And the way it's going to work is, so the time of day, like I said, it's going to be in seconds. That's just the way that I chose to do it. You can, of course, keep track of it in minutes or hours or some sort of combination of both. But for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to use seconds since it's super easy to convert seconds to minutes or hours if you need to. So I'm just going to use seconds. So I'm going to say at 0 seconds, we want the sun, we want it to be midnight. The sun like totally below the ground, midnight. But at the end of the day, however many seconds that is, that means that the sun has done a full rotation. So we want to be able to calculate what that value is, how many seconds are in a day, basically. So that's pretty easy to calculate. We have 60 seconds in a minute, we have 60 minutes in an hour, and we have 24 hours in a day. So we have 86,400 seconds in a day. So we know that this value that comes in is going to be somewhere between 0 and 86,400. And we want to take that value and we want to convert it into a rotation for our sun or our light. So if you come back here, for example, so at 0, our sun is below the Earth and there's no rotation. But a quarter of the way through the day, we want our sun to be rotated 90 degrees so that it's, directly over there. And then halfway through the day, we want it to be rotated 180 degrees so that it's right above us. Why is it not showing? Oh, it's because I haven't updated it. Yeah. But yeah, so at 180 degrees, we want it to be directly above us, and so on. So we want to convert the seconds into a rotation. So to do that, we're going to use something called a map clamp range node, which is super helpful. So the value that we want to map is the time of day in seconds. And it's basically asking us, okay, what is the range of this value? And we know that the range of this value is between 0 and this 86,400 number. So 86,400, because that's how many seconds are in a day. And the outrange that we want to map it to is the rotation. And the rotation value is going to be somewhere between 0 and 360 degrees. So again, this is just taking this time of day in seconds, and it's converting it from 0 to 86,400 into 0 to 360. And then from there, we want to set the directional light. So drag in the directional light. We want to set its rotation. So we'll say set actor rotation. And we're going to set his rotation to this rotation. But we only want to set the pitch. So go ahead and split this and drag this into the pitch. So now that's going to rotate our directional light, but it's not going to actually rotate the sky sphere or the sun or anything like that until we call this little handy update sun direction, which is already written for us. So we'll just go ahead and drag that in. So now we are rotating the light and we are updating the sky sphere or the sun to match it. But of course, if we run this right now, nothing's going to happen because nobody's actually calling this set time of day function. So that is what we'll do next. And just one thing to note here, I saw a lot of tutorials that basically did all the logic inside of this SkySphere class, for actually figuring out what the time of day is. And that's like fine if, you're just kind of doing something really simple. But for any real project, you're not going to want to calculate the time of day inside of the SkySphere class because other people are going to want access to it. It's if you want to like sleep in your game and then wake up 6 hours later, you just really want a function to set the time of day inside of the SkySphere class, and then the SkySphere class will just reflect that change. So the place that we actually want to calculate time of day and keep track of it, in this case, I'm going to do it in the game mode. It's probably a pretty safe place to do it. You could probably do it in the game state or the game instance, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to put it in the game mode. The idea is just to have it somewhere more globally accessible than the SkySphere class. So come in here to blueprints and we'll open the third person game mode and we'll open it up for editing. And so inside of here, we are going to do all the logic to figure out what time of day it is. So first and foremost, we're going to create a few variables that we're going to need access to. So the first one we're going to want is just the time of day, and this is going to be in seconds, so I'm just going to put parentheses seconds after it, and we want this to be a float, and I'm going to move it to a category just for organization's sake called environment, and we'll make it private because we don't want anybody else editing it. And we're also going to want one for the let's just call it game seconds in real seconds. So what this is, I know the name might be a little bit confusing, but this is a value that represents how many game seconds are in like a real world second. Because in most video games, a day-night cycle is much quicker than a real life day-night cycle. So what this value will let us do is very easily set how much faster we want it to be. So for this value, we want it to be constant. It's not going to change over the course of the program. So we'll come up here and say a blueprint read only, and also we want to set it to private. And then I'm going to set this to the environment category, but I'm going to say environment constants, just so we can distinguish that things in here are constant and not meant to be changed in code. And again, these categories are just for readability, or it's just a good habit to get into. And we want one more of these, so go ahead and duplicate this one because it's going to have the same properties. And this one we're going to call seconds in day. And this is really just a constant variable for this number right here. So we'll go ahead and compile and set it to 86,400. Oh yeah, and this one, the game seconds and real seconds, you can set this to whatever you want, but basically the higher the number, the quicker the day-night cycle is going to happen. So I'm just going to start with like 1,000, but feel free to set it to whatever you want. And then this one by default is going to be 0, and this one is basically the starting time of your day, but it's also going to get updated as the program runs. So if you want to start the day at midnight, then you can leave it at 0. If you wanted to set it to like noon, for example, then you'd want to set it to half of this number, because this number is how many seconds are in a day. So if you divide this by 2, then this would be noon, basically. So you'd set it to 43,200 if you wanted to start at noon. But for right now, I just want it to be, start at midnight, so I'm just going to leave it at 0. And yeah, so there's one more thing we need before we can really get started is we're going to want the SkySphere class itself so that we can actually update it. So in the begin play, we'll define that real quick. Begin play. We want to say get all actors of class, and we want to search for our BP my SkySphere. So basically just find the SkySphere. We know there's going to be one of them, so we'll just say get a copy. And we want 0, index 0, and we'll right click on this and promote to a variable. And this is going to be our SkySphere. And we also want this to be in the environment category and mark it as private. All right, so now we have pretty much everything we need to do to calculate the time of day. So we're going to be doing that in the event tick, because obviously it's something that happens every frame. So in the event tick, we basically want to get the time of day. So get the time of day, and then we're going to want to set the time of day to something else that's a little bit ahead of the current time of day. So we're going to take the current time of day and we're going to say float plus, and then hook that up there. So we're basically saying the time of day plus something is going to be the new time of day. So we could just say the delta seconds, but of course, if we did that, then a full cycle in your game would take 24 hours to do, because it's taking the exact same amount of time that it does in real life. So we want to take this value and we want to multiply it by this variable that we created down here, which is the game seconds and real seconds. So this is going to speed up your game cycle tremendously, assuming you have this set to something like 1,000, and hook it up there. All right, so now that we figured out our new time of day, we just want to make sure that it's not greater than this seconds in day. because we want the seconds to loop around. So once it gets to 86,400, we want it to go back to 0. So go ahead and check that real quick. We'll just say, hey, is this value greater than our seconds in a day? And if it is, then we want to, again, we want to just wrap it around back to 0. So the way we can do that in programming is we take the time, or we take the value that we want to wrap around, and we can do something called a mod, which if you just type mod, it's this little percent sign. And we want to mod it by the value we don't want it to go over, so seconds in a day. So if you don't really know what mod is, I can explain it real quick. But basically what mod does is it returns the remainder of a division. So if you do 10 modded by 3, for example, that's going to return 1 because 3 goes into 10 3 times with the remainder of 1. So it returns to you, again, how much is left over after you do the division. So that's exactly what we want here. So if this is slightly above our 84,000 or 86,400, it's going to return how much above it was. So we'll then set the time of day to that value. And then at the very end, we want to get our sky sphere and set time of day on that, which again, this is just that function we made. And of course, the time of day is our time of day. And then don't forget to also hook up the false. So I'm just gonna make a little reroute node here and hook it up like that, because even if it's false, we still want to make sure we call our set time of day on our sky sphere. So yeah, that's the logic. Just to recap real quick, each frame we are taking the delta seconds and multiplying it by some large number to make it go much quicker, and then updating our time of day, and then we're checking if the time of day is greater than the number of seconds in a day. If it is, then we wrap it back around to 0, and then we update our current time of day, which again, this is just this function which updates the light direction and the sky sphere itself. All right, so if we go ahead and run this now, it actually won't quite work because we forgot to do one thing. And if we close it, it should yell at us. Yep. So it's very upset because it's saying, hey, you're trying to move the light, but the light is not set to movable. So we can fix that real easily just by clicking on our light source and setting it to movable. So now if we go ahead and run this, I'm going to press F8 so I can check if it's actually moving. Yep, so you can see our light is slowly rotating around, and as it gets towards the bottom, you can see the sky is getting more dark. I'm just going to increase the speed just so it's a little bit easier to test. I'm going to set the game seconds and real seconds to 10,000. That should be pretty quick. So there you go, you can see it get dark, and then there it goes, up and around, and back down. So yeah, so at this point it's kind of done, but this is where I saw a lot of other tutorials end. But as soon as I started playing with it, I realized that there were some bugs with it. So I wanted to address those real quick. So one thing I noticed is if I went and I changed the time of day to, or sorry, no. So if I went and I actually built the lighting, so if you just hit build up here, it's going to build everything, including the lighting in your project. You'll notice something not so great happens. So if I run it now, oh, well, there's one more thing we need to change first. Because you notice if you run it, it doesn't actually start at midnight. It takes it a second to get to midnight, as you see. So I just started it, not midnight. Now it's midnight. And that's because this value inside, so open up my sky sphere. So we're clamping this range from 0 to 86,400, and then we're mapping that to 0 to 360. So 0 is actually putting the light like behind us, as if it was just setting or just rising. The value we actually want is 90 for this, and so then this bumps this range up to 450. So now it's going to go, when it's 0, it's going to go to 90, and 90 is going to be below us, which is actually what we want. So Now if we run it, you can see it's pitch black when it first starts out. And that pitch blackness is a bug with the other tutorials that I watched. As soon as you rebuild the lighting and run it, the game is like totally pitch black at nighttime, and it doesn't look that great during the daytime either. So yeah, I had to experiment as to why that was the case, because if you notice, if you set the time of day in seconds to start at like 43,000 or something, which is roughly noon, and then by the time it gets night, it actually doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty good. But if you set it to 0 to start out, and it starts out at nighttime, then it looks really bad at nighttime, which I thought that was really strange. Like, why does it matter where the light starts? But I eventually figured out that what it's doing is something with this skylight. So if you click on the skylight over here on the right, the skylight is kind of like the ambient light in the scene. And apparently the way Unreal works is when the game first starts, it kind of takes a snapshot of the current lighting and saves that as the ambient lighting in the scene. Or sorry, it takes a snapshot of like the sky basically and says, okay, this is the current sky and this is what the ambient lighting is for the sky. So if it's nice and bright and day out, then the ambient lighting is going to be, there's going to be light and stuff like underneath desks and in places there really shouldn't be light, but since light bounces, it kind of creates the illusion of, um, light in places that it's not actually hitting. So, but you can see if I start the game and it starts totally black, then it's kind of taking a snapshot of the night sky and saying, okay, that's the ambient light. And since there is none at night, it looks like this. But if you start the game halfway through the day, then it takes a snapshot of this, which is nice and bright. And then even at night, it still applies those values. So it kind of looks like a nice moonlight effect. So obviously we want to be able to start the day at midnight and still have that nice moonlight effect. So in order to do that, we want to click on our skylight and we want to change this source type from captured to specified. And what that's going to do is going to tell Unreal to don't bother capturing it, just use the one that I give you. So we'll say specified, and then we will select daylight ambient cube map. Now, if you open this up, it's just like a daylight scene with some clouds and stuff. So it's basically taking the light from this texture and applying it to the world, no matter what the time of day is. If you want to get like real fancy, you can have multiple of these, one for day, one for night, one for like noon or whatever, or dusk, and then you can kind of swap them out. But I think just having one works really good in pretty much all use cases. So we're basically just saying that, hey, use the daylight ambient cube map, even if it's nighttime, just so there's some, light around. And then I'm going to just delete these walls so we can see things a little easier. So if we go ahead and rebuild this again so that the lighting gets rebuilt, and we run it now, you'll see even if we start at nighttime, it will still look like there's some moonlight. So let me send this back to 0. And if we go ahead and rerun this, you'll see even at nighttime, it still looks really nice. And in the day, it also still looks pretty nice. So yeah, that was the main bug I saw with the other tutorials, and I think this is a pretty good way to fix it. One other thing I noticed, you may or may not run into this problem depending on how you set up your player, but if you're having weird issues with reflections, it's because of this guy right here, this sphere reflection capture, and I'll just explain this really quickly. Basically what this is when the game first starts, or maybe it does it in the editor, I'm not sure, but by the time the game starts, this reflection capture will have captured the scene around it. So if it's daytime when it captures it, it's going to capture a daytime image. And then anything in your scene that's reflective, like a mirror or a really shiny cup or like a puddle on the ground, it's going to use that image that it captured as the reflection. So it could look weird in some cases because it might capture the daytime, but then when it switches to night, like your pawns are still going to be reflecting as if it's daytime. If that's the case, obviously you can just delete this and it still looks pretty good in my opinion. You just don't have as great as reflections. But if you want to have like certain reflections for certain times of day, then you would just need to create, different captures for each time of day, and then you would just switch this to specified cube map, and then you'd give it the cube map you want one for day, one for night, and you just switch those out as the time of day progresses. But I figured that's just like way too much for this tutorial since it might not even be needed. But yeah, so this is pretty much the gist of it. Um, it fixes the main bug that I saw with the other tutorials. So you can set the time of day to whatever you want, and it will just kind of work. And you can, again, set the speed to whatever you want. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a thumb up and subscribe. Thanks.